video I'm going to show you two simple knitting decreases, two ways to increase and two ways to cast off. So once you're starting to knit anything except square or rectangular projects, for example a garment, you'll need to know how to have more stitches on your needle or less stitches on your needle, which will make the shaping for the garment. So the first fairly easy way to decrease stitches is to knit two stitches together. So it's much like your knit stitch, but this time you go underneath the second stitch on your needle and then you just knit it off as you did when you were doing a knit stitch. So now where there were two stitches, we've just got one. So let's look at that again. We come to the second stitch, we push our needle up through both, yarn over from the back, holding it firmly. Now we've got one stitch where we had two. So if we do that one more time, through from the bottom of the second stitch, the yarn goes over and we push it through. Now if you're reading a pattern, you'll see instructions in abbreviations, and that abbreviation is K2, the number 2, TOG, knit two together. Now there's a characteristic about knitting two stitches together, and that is that they actually lean to the right. So I'm not sure if you can just see that, but these stitches have a little bit of a lean up and they lean to the right. Now the second decrease, which is quite an easy decrease, is called slip one, knit one, pass slip stitch over. So first of all, slip one. Slip one means pass it from one needle to the other without knitting it. So we've slipped one, we're going to knit one, then we're going to put our needle into that stitch that we slipped, and we're going to pass it over the stitch that we knitted and drop it off. So again, we're making two stitches down to one stitch. We'll do that again. We'll slip one, so don't knit it, just slip it. We'll knit one, and we'll pick up that stitch that we slipped and we'll pass the slip stitch over. One more time. Slip one, knit one, and pass the slip stitch over. Oops. Okay. Now, this way of casting off you'll find in written instructions as K1, SL1, so knit one, slip one, then PSSO, pass slip stitch over. Now if you look at these ones we've done now, these are leaning to the left. So the ones we did knit two together, they lean to the right. The ones that we do pass slip stitch over, they're leaning to the left. Now that's quite important because quite often designers use those characteristics to specify which method of decreasing they want because of the effect they can get on their garment. I've done a couple of rows in this sample, so you can see here these are our knit two together and they're leaning towards the right, those two. These ones here are the knit one, slip one, pass slip stitch over, and they're leaning to the left. So that's just something to remember. It's always important to follow the instructions because the designer might have in mind an effect in the front of your knitting like that, and particularly in lace, that you have these going in the correct direction. Okay, so now if we want to increase our stitches, And I have to say there's many ways of decreasing and increasing. I'm just showing you a couple of simple ones to get you started. Now, a really, really simple way of increasing your stitch is to actually just pass your yarn over itself. So you're just making a little slip knot, and you just slip that onto your needle, and that becomes a stitch. And it is actually fairly invisible once you get going. You probably won't see it, but you then just treat that as a normal stitch. So that it's just giving you an extra stitch on your needle. Very easy. You just twist, and the twisted yarn has to go on top, and then just slip it on. Not too tight, because when you come back you won't be able to knit it. Just keep it all the same tension. Bring it over, and you're actually increasing here. And you can hardly notice where you've increased those stitches. So one more time. We make that little loop, and we've got the end of the yarn on top. Just slip that over your needle and pull it, and that's an increased stitch. And quite often the designer won't specify how they want you to increase stitches. They'll just have the abbreviation M1, which means make one. And I find this is quite a good method, particularly increasing on sleeves, and it doesn't really show where you've increased. One other method of increasing is to knit into the front and then into the back of the same stitch. So you knit into the front by bringing your yarn over, bringing your needle through, but instead of slipping that off as you would for a normal knit stitch, you then go into the back of your stitch and you knit that, bringing it through, and you've made an extra stitch by knitting into the front and the back of the stitch. Now, as you can see, that results in just a little bit of a bump on your knitting, which may or may not matter. So doing that one again, we go into the front, and like a normal knit stitch, except you don't take it off, you now go to the back and you knit into the back, and then you take it off. One more time, knit into the front, over, don't take it off, now knit into the back. So this is another way of increasing your stitches, but you can see you get those little bumps. Now if you see that written as an abbreviation, it will be KFB, knit front back. Now I'll show you some simple methods of casting off. Again, there's many ways of casting off, but these are two fairly easy ones. Now, one of the characteristics of these cast-offs is that they can be very firm, and in fact too firm. So imagine you were casting off around a neck and you did it too tightly, then you wouldn't be able to get it over the person's head. So mostly when you're casting off the tops of socks, you need a fairly elastic cast off. So until you learn some other ways, if you want to use these ways, I suggest that you get a larger needle. So for me, I've got this piece of knitting is on a 4mm needle, and this I'm going to cast off with a 5mm needle. And if you were using US sizes, that's a size 6 that I'm knitting on, and I'm casting off with a size 8. So just using our larger needle. There are two ways I'm going to show you right now, and they're both fairly similar and get a fairly similar result. So the first way is to knit your first stitch, keeping it loose, knit your second stitch, and you can see that those are fairly loose, and then, like we did with the decreasing, we're going to pass the second stitch over the first stitch. And you can see I'm keeping that loose. Then we knit one more stitch, and we can't pick up the second stitch, and we pass that over. We knit one more stitch, we pick up the second stitch, and we pass that over. Now if you have a look at that, you're getting a little bit like a chain effect. Can you? I'm sure you can see that. It's a bit of a chain effect. But you can also see that that's fairly elastic. So if we do a couple more stitches, just so you can see it, slip that one back because we knitted that already. Knit another one. Take it over. Knit one. And slip one. Now you can see that that has some give in it. So for the second method, and it's probably a good idea to continue with the same method, not change halfway like I'm doing. The second method is again like some of the decreasing we did. So it is simply knit two together. Sorry, that again. Knit two together. Then, and I always just elongate that stitch a little bit, put it back on the needle where it was with a twist as you go. So knit two together, loose, a little twist, a bit like your cast on that one. Just make sure it's nice and loose. Knit two together, put your stitch back on the needle with that little twist. Knit two together and put your stitch back on the needle. Now you can see, I hope, that the two different cast-offs give you a very similar effect. You get that chain effect, but also by using that larger needle and making sure you keep it loose, it's not tight, so that will stretch and go over somebody's neck or around the top of a sock and fit all right. But do use that larger needle. Practice until you see which size needle will give you the result you want. And keeping it loose, too loose is better than too tight because it will actually eventually just work out. Okay, so from now on you should be able to get started on a lot of different knitting patterns.